Hello and welcome to another edition of PorA Raw. I'm your host, David Russell, and I am here with my co-host, Caleb Jackson. What's up, Caleb?
What's up, David? How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there, buddy, man. Just work and school and more school. I'm going through systematic logic right now, and it was like I got lost. I really did. Like
Oh
I
boy.
started to do Craig's and Moreland's book just so I could be like, yeah, I'm going to prep for this. I'm going to prep for this class. And then no. I went and I started doing the class and I got lost. And I'm like, man, I got to print out all the slides and I got to go over it again and again and again because categorical logic is pretty tough.
Yeah, so you could say premise 1, if David takes that class, he'll be confused. Premise 2, David takes the class, therefore. Premise 3, David is confused.
Yeah, there you go. Modus opponens argument there. But yeah, well, we are also joined here by my good friend and sister, ChristDefender. Actually, no, I don't really know her that well, but like I watch her videos all the time, so I feel like I know her. So how you doing?
I'm doing very well, David.
Nice. So you're from across the pond. We're so honored that you decided to join us tonight for this edition, and I just wanted to get to put you on the air and get to know you a little bit better, and talk about your ministry and apologetics.
Cool.
So,
alrighty.
So, yeah, what prompted you to get into the apologetics aspect?
That is a good question, and you know what? It often leaves me a bit stumped because for me, because I'm the one, living the life, for me, it's like at one point I was doing one thing and then all of a sudden I'm here doing all of this apologetic stuff I would never have thought of before,
Yeah.
Strange experience for me.
Yeah, I hear you. So you're on TikTok and YouTube. Can you tell us a little bit about that platform and why you do it and stuff like that?
So TikTok is a fun one. And the reason I jumped on that when I did is because it was fairly new. And I knew that would be a good place for not just myself, Christians in general, to jump on and share the gospel, do apologetics, evangelism, because the platform was new. So, they would push your content out more because they want people to join in. And I started a TikTok because of a job interview I had, which I had to prep for. It was a 4-hour job interview, and I had to prep for it. It was a social media position. That was how I got introduced to that platform. YouTube's always been around.
Mm-hmm.
And I think YouTube is great for the more long form stuff, whereas TikTok it's fun, it's like short bursts of apologetics.
Yeah, I know when I first saw you, I was like, hey, this is a Christian girl apologist, and I want to put her up against an atheist girl. And I was like, we've never had that on this show before. But I was like, you know what, let me give her a choice. And you decided you wanted to critique this video, which is fine. It's really cool. But just in the aspect of getting to know you, I mean, when did you get saved? Kind of what is your testimony? What's life like? Tell us a little bit about yourself in that regard.
All right. So I was saved about 8 years ago. I didn't grow up a Christian. I didn't really grow up in anything, to be honest. It was all kind of just, make it up as you go along. I wouldn't have necessarily called myself an atheist either. To be honest, all I really wanted to do was try to live out my life freely, not really understanding what that truly meant, only focusing on freedom to rather than freedom from, which is the knowledge I came into when I came to Christ. So before I was saved, and even for about 6 years after I was saved, I was living with same-sex attraction. I never felt comfortable with calling myself a lesbian, even before any kind of godly influence. It just never felt quite right. There was something more to the attraction. And for that 6-year period after I was saved, the Holy Spirit really led me through mainly the creation account, teaching me the purpose of women, the purpose of men, the purpose of sex, of marriage. And it was beautiful and it was painful. And it was only, 2 years ago? 2 years ago when I finally sort of, with finality, decided, okay, this seems like one of the biggest last things I need to give up to Christ in order to fully live my purpose out in him. So yeah, about 2 years ago, I made that decision. And then after that came baptism. And here I am. Yeah.
Right on. That's awesome. No. I mean, that's a great story. I mean, we all have them. Like I was telling, I've told the audience several times about like how I ran into a crisis of faith when my dad passed away, because I got into an argument with my atheist cousin who was intellectual and is purported genius supposedly, and he just like tore me up, and I was walking out there like, why do I believe this, and that's kind of like what really got me into apologetics, is because I realized how blindly I believed, and that was kind of like my big push into apologetics. I really started hungering for the truth. Did you find that when you started getting into this apologetic stuff?
A hunger.
You sound seasoned. So I'm like, you just said 2 years, but you sound really seasoned in apologetics and stuff. So like, what was your driving force? Was it truth?
You know what? Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. Truth is probably my highest value.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you.
And I particularly, that's partly why I particularly love unraveling the atheistic arguments, because it's like, it's basically just logic. It's thought. It's intellect. That's fun for me.
Yeah, I hear you. I love it too. Yeah. So, who are some of your heroes in the apologetic world?
The first exposure that I had to the apologetics world was J. John. Do you know him?
No. Do you know J. John,
okay.
Caleb? No, I don't know.
He's British. So from him, it kind of got meteor and meteor. So from J. John, it went to Ravi, and the whole RZIM ministry, Michael Ramsden and Nabil Qureshi. I even got the opportunity to meet Michael Ramsden and Nabil Qureshi before he passed, and they both prayed for me. And I think that those little things that, along the journey, they were sort of indications to me of where God was taking me, which was into the ministry of apologetics.
Yeah. See, you know what I found really interesting about your content? Yeah, I guessed RZIM like right away because of the way you talk. I do the same thing. But I think what RZIM specialized in, and I know both of our hearts broke when we heard the news about Ravi and stuff like that in the investigation. But Michael Ramsden, I mean, that man blew me away, and so did Nabil. Yeah, Michael's amazing. But I did get kind of sick of hearing the same sermons over again, because he doesn't have as many as Ravi did or Nabil did. But one thing that really struck me, and maybe you can relate to this and talk a little bit about it too, was I love relational apologetics. Right. So, and I noticed like a lot of your questions and stuff, and RZIM's was the same way, is like, it's that a relational aspect of apologetics, and it's a cumulative type case, right? Where you're trying to meet people where they're at and make it sound appealing by using not only your intellect, but a way that can be relatable.
I mean, I don't see any other way of it working, because we do this for people, right? We do this to share the knowledge of Christ to people, and to get people to actually think, to get believers to think about why they believe what they believe, and unbelievers to do the same thing, but come to the opposite conclusion. So yeah, the relational aspect it's imperative.
Yeah, I think so too. And Caleb, I know you, our co-host, he just spent a whole summer witnessing to people over at the beach. That's where his mission trips are, at the beach. So, but he's a heretic, so we can ignore him.
I was going to say, wow, David was almost going to say something completely nice without having a backhanded compliment, and then he just added that in there.
I have to a little bit, but yeah, I hear you. And, I love making apologetics like relatable to people. And, like you said, they're who we're doing it for. If we're not doing it for that, then what are we doing it for? And then you look at, like, not only is it relational, but it's edifying to you as well. And then, next thing you know, you're getting comments by people that are just like, hey, what about this? Or what about that? Hey, you helped me here, you helped me there. And you're like, wow, this actually works. And that's why I love just keeping it that way, because I really think that apologetics has to be infused in all of evangelism now. We live in and what's funny is I got to go down to Puerto Rico, where my mom was, and that's where I was telling you I was out of country.
Yeah,
I had to cancel our first broadcast, but I learned that the people down there really craved those conversations, where I would get where in the States, and you probably get it worse in the UK, but like people are just, they're dead set in their ways, and it's kind of like, I don't want to hear it type thing, or like, there is always a response, or they're hitting you back. But down there, the people were so open to it, and we just talked for like hours. And that was just amazing for me. So without further ado, I do want to get into the video, so I'm not going to keep grilling you here. But yeah, we all love apologetics here. And I just want you to plug in your TikTok and YouTube. Just plug that in one more time before we get started with the video.
So it's just at ChristDefender. It's also Instagram as well. So same username across the board. Yeah. You'll see new videos at least twice a week. Good.
So you did say you were in studio. Do you actually have a studio? Or you do it from
Well, I borrow one.
You borrow one? See, I just do
I'm
it
here
in
now.
my basement. I do it in my basement. Yeah, we're keeping you awake. We'll keep this at an hour. We're sorry. But yeah, I do it all in my basement. Caleb, he just sits in front of some books to make him look smart. So
my degrees, yeah.
But without further ado, folks, we are going to critique Disproving God by The Friendly Atheist. And I'm just going to start the video and I'll pause it and we will talk about this and that. You can, ChristDefender, you can just jump into and just be like, hey, stop it here. And I'll just be like, okay, hurry up. And I'll like scramble a little bit and it'll go a couple seconds after you want it to stop, but it will be stopped.
Okay.
So, all right. So here we go.
Do I know for a fact that there is no God?
You guys can hear it.
No.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that, and I know that's going to upset some people, but no, I don't think I could prove to you that God doesn't exist, just like I couldn't prove to you there's a flying pink unicorn in this room right now, just like I couldn't prove there's a flying spaghetti monster out there. I don't think you can disprove someone's
I froze. Sorry.
belief.
There we go.
That said, the definition of atheist, as far as I've always considered it, as far as I've seen anywhere that matters, the definition of atheist is not someone who knows God doesn't exist or who could prove to you God doesn't exist. It's someone who doesn't believe God exists. You know, if you take God out of the picture, my entire world functions the exact same way. And so God doesn't change that for me. So why throw something in there that doesn't make any sense? I've never seen any evidence to suggest that God exists. And every time when I was growing up.
All right, we'll stop it there. First off, you can't disprove somebody else's belief. Where do you guys sit on that? That to me, I just felt uncomfortable when I heard that you can't disprove somebody else's belief. But we disprove things all the time. You know, we do that as a part of exploring the truth of things. We come up with hypothesis and then we disprove that hypothesis or we confirm it. So what is he saying here? I know the picture's kind of funny, so don't laugh while we're sitting here.
You know, it is a bit of a strange statement to make because your beliefs come from something. Your beliefs aren't just this vague, separate entity existing somewhere around you or in you. They come from experiences, from emotional attachments. So, of course, you can disprove a belief, you know?
Yeah, I think so too. Caleb, you got anything on that?
Yeah, I think when people say, first of all, I don't know if the idea of God is a proof, like a logical proof. I think it's more of a probability, although there are some people who say, yes, if you could show God is logically incoherent, then that would be a disproof of God. And that's when you see, like the argument from evil or the argument from divine hiddenness. That's what those attempt to do, is to say these are logically incompatible, or at least newer versions say it's very unlikely. So, but yeah, I do think you can disprove things, as in saying we can prove that there are no married bachelors just by definition. So we can prove there are no four-sided triangles. We could prove that there is currently no 50-ton elephant on top of the White House, because you can look and see. So, as long as you're not redefining what an elephant is, and if you say it's invisible and all that, then it's no longer really an elephant. So in sense like that, yes, we can absolutely prove certain things and disprove certain things. So I don't think that his analogy of, I feel like the analogy of unicorns and flying spaghetti monsters is like very disingenuous, and more sophisticated atheists will tell you that as well. Like, that's not really what we're trying to compare it to. And I know that the friendly atheist here is the philosopher of our time, but it might be, if I can say that without being too pretentious, I think it's not a very good argument. So
yeah, I'd agree. I always look at this as, what do you mean? What do you mean by disprove at this point? Or why can't we disprove something? And what it comes down to me is like, will you believe regardless if we give you a good case for belief, or if we give you a good case to disprove it? If I make a great case for against the flying spaghetti monster, for example, are you going to believe it? Is it just going to be your perception? Are you just going to is it something volitional? And I think what I've always dealt with is there's usually something volitional behind it. The next question I have is, he's saying it's a lack of belief. Is it a lack of belief? Do you guys think atheism is a lack of belief, or do you actually think there's something more behind it?
I don't think it's just, merely a lack of belief. I think it's a positive statement. Atheism is you saying there's no God. If you're not sure, if you're looking for the truth, you're an agnostic. You're not an atheist. An atheist is saying is atheist. There's no God. It's not like
Yeah. Sorry,
a positive statement.
Yeah, I think so too. I think there's a lot. Caleb, did you want to chime in there?
Typically, I try to stay out of the lack theism versus disbelief debates, because I think it's just semantics, and I honestly don't care. Because it's like, it doesn't matter. I understand where you're coming from. It doesn't really matter. But I don't know. I know some people will try to say analogies like, the gumball analogy of saying, well, if I tell you there's an even number of gumballs in the machine, and you say, I don't believe you, that doesn't mean that you're therefore saying that there is an odd number. It's just saying you don't believe that there's an even number, but that doesn't therefore follow that you believe there's an odd number. You can disbelieve both. They're just not claimed to know. So I think some atheists try to pull that card of saying, well, I'm not saying I'm not affirming there is no God. I'm just saying I don't necessarily hold to the truth proposition that there is a God. But that's neither here nor there for where I care. I don't put too much weight in that.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to add this back and start it up again. If it goes.
Just stare at his face. It's okay.
I know, right? Just look at his face. It's going to make you laugh.
Yeah.
I don't know why this isn't working.
Anyone in our audience can make a meme.
I've never seen any evidence to suggest that God exists. And every time when I was growing up, I thought I had that evidence. I thought I knew, look, that parking spot is open. God must like me. Or, something good happened in my life. God must be looking out for me. And now I realize, a lot of that's just coincidence. And a lot of that might have happened even if God didn't exist. So usually anytime, I think the burden of proof is on religious people to explain to me why God exists. And every single time what they give me are anecdotes and personal testimonies, which.
All right, so anecdotes and personal testimonies.
What I noticed was that, so he criticizes theists, saying that in his experience, their evidence is just personal experience. But then he kind of trips himself up, because he claims that he used to believe and now he doesn't, right?
Right.
And he's saying that he believed in that sort of experiential, anecdotal evidence for God. But then he's saying that that's what they give as evidence and it's not good, and that was exactly what he did when he believed.
Yeah, I hear you there. Caleb, you want to chime in real quick?
Yeah, first of all, if he's just saying that the only arguments people have ever given for God are all anecdotal, then he hasn't really read much philosophy of religion. But yeah. putting all of that aside, if he wants to say, well, this is all just anecdotes, even though that's not true, I would say, so what? I mean, what's wrong with anecdotes? Now, I don't think anyone here is saying we should believe all anecdotal stories no matter what. But if you're going to discount an anecdote, you need to give some justification other than, well, it's an anecdote, because that's just being tautological. I mean, you could say there's lots of things we believe just on our own personal testimony that we can't show other people. Do you believe that the external world is real? You believe that other minds exist? You believe in that time is real? All that stuff. I can't prove that to David, because I'm begging the question that David is not just a figment of my imagination. So I can't demonstrate that. You also couldn't demonstrate to a completely blind person that or that the sun rises every morning, that light exists. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't believe someone else. So it depends on the quality of the testimony, the kind of person giving you the anecdote. Do you trust them? Are there holes in the story? So forth. So you have to have more reasons than just saying it's anecdotal. You have to say, like, here's the problems with the anecdote itself. So he's being way too generalized here in his critique.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing is like what I notice here is, like, there's always an argument. They always end up making a positive claim. It doesn't matter, whether it's a comment, and I don't let people get away with it anymore. Like, oh, God's not real. Okay, can you demonstrate that for me then? You know what I mean? You got to flip the table sometimes, because, when someone says, I just lack belief, but then they want to go on and say, well, there is no God. We can disprove Thor. We can disprove, and then they get into positive arguments, and they kind of, to me, that kind of shifts burden of proof back on them. So it's not just like, okay, the theist makes a claim, so the burden of proof is just on him. In every conversation I've ever dealt with an atheist, and I don't want to say every atheist. I do have good atheists that come on here that haven't actually done that when we debate and stuff like that. But in the online world and so forth, that's what I do get. And I even get it with, Christians. And I'm the type of guy that's going to flip that back and say, okay, well, now you have made a positive claim. Now you are telling me what you believe about the universe and how it came to be. You're not just saying, I don't know.
That's why I think you have the difference between positive and negative atheism. Negative atheism just tries to say that the burden of proof is on the theist. They have to prove their point. The arguments are not good enough to prove their point, so therefore we just don't believe because of that. Positive atheism says, here's actual arguments against why God exists, why he most likely doesn't. And so I think those are more interesting. I would much prefer them go that route. And say that here's the reasons to think God doesn't exist. Here's why the universe looks like it wasn't created, or something like that. That to me is more compelling than people just not liking the arguments for God. So,
anything else, ChristDefender?
In my experience speaking with atheists about, any matter really, it tends to come down to, it's not really an intellectual argument that stands against the existence of God or whatever it is that we're talking about, morality maybe. It's usually that there's some kind of resistance or rejection to the existence of God that's more emotional, or like, I actually just want to live my own life and not be concerned with what God wants, or if he's really there.
Yeah, it's definitely volitional there. It's a matter of the heart sometimes, I think. And I've had dealt with people though, that are generally, seekers, and they want to, they want to look into it more. But I've also, the majority of time, have seen people that have seen the evidence, and to say there's no evidence to me is just like, where have you been at? Like Caleb said, where have you been at? For the last, you know, millennium.
At
I
least
mean,
say
we
that
have,
the evidence isn't the arguments aren't sound or the evidence
right.
isn't good, but to act as if no one's even tried to present it is
Yeah,
what's
and that's
pretty.
the thing with these arguments. I mean, they give you, when it comes to like, well, I'll let him speak, and then I'll talk about the argument of analogy from analogy.
Testimonies, which, okay, that worked for you, but that's not proof. That's just something that you went through. And maybe if I went through the same thing, I would have a different explanation for it. It's funny because you sometimes hear, especially Christians will say like, oh no, someone prayed and their limb grew back or something crazy like that. And it's like, oh really? Where's the video evidence of that? Because no one's ever seen it. There's even a website called like why doesn't God heal amputees.com, or I hope I'm getting that right. But that's the idea that Christians, especially because they're the ones who tend to go around doing apologist work, they can never prove to you why God does exist. They have stories, they have anecdotes, they don't have proof. And so they always try to throw the burden on atheists to do something that no one else would be expected to do, which is prove to me that my delusions are wrong. Well, I can't. What I can show you is that when you take God out of the picture, we can make sense of just about anything. And then when it comes to things like, where did the universe come from? Why are we here on Earth? Or at least, I think the universe question is more than philosophical. Where did this universe?
All right. So where are we at? Caleb, I'm going to let you respond to this one real quick because you're my miracle guy.
Yeah, so for the audience, I've said this multiple times, but for new viewers, I'm currently I've written 2 books, and I'm currently working on a third, and this one's about miracles in the contemporary world and arguing for the truth of Christianity from that. And the examples he gives, I was just kind of smiling because he talks about video. I actually have a section in the very long chapter I have on the healings where I have a section about miracles that were captured on video, and I have a section about body parts, including amputated legs growing back. So just check that out when it comes out, because there are to see people say that and then you're like, oh, actually here are some reports, and they just like, oh, they didn't even, I'd rather them say, okay, well, here's some reports, but here's the issues with them. They act like they've never even heard of them. So I actually brought this up if anyone wants to watch our interview with Ben Watkins that Travis Worth and I did. Towards the end of it, we're talking about miracles. I brought up one of those cases, and Ben was just like, fair enough. So that's all I have to say about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I was going to ask, is personal testimony a truth, Caleb?
Yeah, that goes back to the answer I said earlier. It can be. I mean, certainly there are testimonies that we should be more suspicious of. I'm not saying that every, when someone says that they've seen Elvis risen from the dead or something, we would not generally believe them, but it depends on the quality of the testimony. So generally speaking, if someone said that, if someone told you they saw a man fly, and I would be like, well, okay, that's probably not true, because what's the chances the person just lying or was deceived, right? But the more witnesses you have, if this happened under a hostile environment, if you're being crucified and persecuted for what you believe, you're more likely to be sincere and not merely lying. If this is an event that didn't happen just to a few people, but to lots of people, we could say even a crowd of 500, then you start getting more and more justifiable testimony. And so that's kind of where the difference is when people try to make analogies of, well, so and so said they were abducted by an alien in their bedroom and no one else saw this. It's a bit harder to compare that to a public event that's seen by thousands of people and so forth. So it just depends on testimony.
All right, ChristDefender, it's your turn.
Well, the same question.
Anything in that video, I guess that.
Yeah, like any part that stuck out to you in that section.
No, not really.
That's fine. Anything for you, David? No.
One of the things here is that he's talking about delusions, right? Y'all hear me okay?
No,
Yeah.
I can. Yeah.
My bar's kind of flipping out for some reason today. I have no idea why.
Oh.
But he talked about he can't disprove people's delusions. So he's already appealing to some sort of objective truth. So to me, that's kind of like, okay, why do you say that you can't disprove a thing, but then you're going to call it deluded? To me, it doesn't seem consistent, with the claims he's making, and when it comes to those arguments from analogy and so forth, when it comes to like flying spaghetti monsters and so forth, I just really have a hard time with saying that there is no evidence, because we can give evidence and we can give a case, but it's you could say it's not sufficient for you, but to say that there is none, I think, is being dishonest with whoever you're engaged with.
It's a false comparison. The whole spaghetti monster, flying pink unicorn, it's a false comparison. It's like, I think, Caleb, you said, they kind of recreate or redefine what God is, and they sort of argue against that. But that's
Right.
not what, that's not what Christians posit.
Besides Mormons, that's not. That's not what Christians think.
Because like
people,
the difference between the unicorn or the spaghetti monster is that you're describing something that's material,
right.
whereas God is spaceless, timeless, immaterial.
Right.
So they're not the same.
Yeah, which is why when people try to talk about like the ontological argument and you hear parodies of it, most of them don't understand the argument, because you talk about like a maximally great being, which is God, and they'll say, well, a maximally great unicorn. It's like, well, a unicorn by definition is limited because it's material. It can only have one horn, and so forth.
Right.
So there's all these limitations to it. And actually, I think he's getting. I think where we stopped the video, he's getting to the universe existing. So I might stop where I'm talking, because I think we'll go more into that on that point, because that kind of goes into like contingency stuff and arbitrary limit stuff. But
I was gonna go there next too, because that I was really gonna hit the teapot. He uses Bertrand Russell's teapot too.
Yeah.
So let's continue on.
Answer to that. What I'm not doing is jumping to this radical conclusion that, God must have poofed it into existence. I don't have to do that. I can be honest and say, there are some things I don't know. There are some things I may never know. But everything else, I can try to find an explanation for it. In fact, that's what scientists do all the time. They find explanations for things that we used to, attribute to God. There's even an argument called like God of the gaps, where, if you say God did all of this stuff, and then we find reasonable explanations for all of those things, we're painting God into the smaller and smaller gap until at some point even that's going to go away. So it's a silly idea to say that God does all this stuff when we have natural explanations for it. It's silly to make atheists explain why God doesn't exist, because, you can't explain to me why there's no unicorn in the air right now that's invisible and you can't see it or touch it. We could make up any symbol. I think Bertrand Russell had the flying teapot going around the universe. Like, you can't disprove it, so I guess it must be there. And we all know that's a silly argument. But, it gets very personal when you're talking about God instead of a teapot. And that's why I think people are averse to talking about it. My name is Hemant Mehta. I write at friendlyatheist.com. If you'd like.
So that's kind of like the end of the video there. He just goes on and on about like things like this, and this is like a characteristic he always brings to his videos, and that's why I wanted to go over it in a way. Like I said, it's a false analogy, and you notice he kind of reasons in a circle too. I did notice that. So I'm gonna open the floor up to ChristDefender first on this one. If do you have anything on this one?
The whole God of the gaps thing.
Oh yeah, go.
It's interesting because he also he takes a faith position, right? He takes a faith position by saying that basically, if you give science enough time, you'll find a natural explanation for the origin of the universe. But that's illogical. Nature, the universe didn't create itself. And the
Right.
God of the gaps idea that theists just sort of plug God into a gap in their knowledge, it's false. I mean, it's not always wrong to say that I don't know this thing, God did it, or God is sovereign in that area, or God has that knowledge. But the way that it's typically presented by atheists, it's sort of almost derogatory,
Right. Yeah. Caleb, what were you got anything to add on this one about the universe and all that stuff?
I think it's pretty much what we said about from the last one about God being different, metaphysically different than like a spaghetti monster and everything. But yeah, as far as explanations goes, I think that's another straw man. There are some Christians who will take that approach of, well, you don't know, and I think that is a silly argument. It's a mistake, but not the more sophisticated philosophers that or theologians that you see. Typically, you can. It's not. I agree that you shouldn't just say we don't know, therefore God. You should try to say, well, we don't know what it is, but let's try to define the attributes that this would have. So what properties would this thing need? Then when you start describing it, it starts to sound pretty godlike, and that's kind of where you get it. So like when Craig does something like the Kalam argument, he doesn't just say the universe began to exist, therefore it was God. He says whatever caused it would be timeless, spaceless, changeless, etc. And these are the attributes of a God, and so therefore God's best explanation. So that's kind of the difference there. And I had this same hiccup with like Matt Dillahunty when we were talking about miracles and the resurrection. He's saying even if we conceded that these things happen, we would just say we don't know what the explanation is. And I was saying, well, in science, all the time we have hypothetical entities that we can't directly observe, but that we predict exist. Like you could look at the Higgs boson, which is a physical thing that gives gives mass to most matter in the universe. This was predicted several years before it was actually found, and we predicted it based on things. So even though we can't observe things, we can say, well, it would look like this if it was. They did that with the planet Neptune as well. When we saw Uranus's orbit, we said, based on the math, based on the gravity, based on all this, I'm going to predict there's going to be another planet at this spot, and lo and behold, we found Neptune. So we can say that we can use the information we have in the world to predict certain entities. And I think that's what we're doing with theism. We're saying, here's a phenomenon, here's what we would expect to be able to cause this phenomenon, and we predict what it would look like. So that's essentially what the theist is doing.
So again, yeah, I would agree with you. We're going beyond anecdotes and testimony. We're giving explanations, and it's not our fault that you don't buy them. You can't just turn a blind eye and say we're not doing that. And that's what I don't get is I run into this type of attitude so much. So I don't, I mean, if we're sitting there explaining something, we're not using God of the gaps. We're saying, okay, this is the best explanation, has more explanatory power, more explanatory scope. It's not ad hoc. So what is, where's this disconnect? Why is it always there? Why do you think, Caleb?
Disconnect with the
with the evidence we do present. We're giving explanations. I mean, but it's not like I'm just getting the idea of like, well, I don't buy it.
Yeah, and that's
it's like they keep repeating the same thing. Oh, it's God of the gaps, or it's like, or sometimes you just get flat out ignored. They'll jump on something else.
If someone says if I give them that and they say I don't buy it, I would say, well, you don't have to buy it, but if you want to buy it, it's on Amazon. No, but no, I would say that I think that also one thing I jotted down that he brought up earlier, and he said this radical notion of a God is if the God hypothesis is that ad hoc and that unintuitive, when in reality, for almost all of human experience, and even today, most people actually believe in God. And that doesn't make it right, but it does show that like this is the idea that humanity's had for since humanity has been around, is attributing the supernatural to nature. And so to add this idea of this is some new concept that we have to prove, and this is so weird. Like, no, this is the default position that we as humans have. Now, default positions can be wrong, but again, that's where we need arguments to counter it. If I have senses and I can see light and I can hear sound, I trust those default, even though I can't really prove them. Now, I could have some kind of deficiency in those, and if that can be proven, we have blind spots, but we at least know that we have them. So if someone can show me that I have issues with my eyes or my ears and that I'm not detecting something, that's fine. But outside of that kind of defeater, I don't see why the instinctive view that there's a God just intuitively is not itself justified. I mean, that's I think what people forget is that like atheists are really kind of a strange minority in the history of humanity. They're the ones acting as if they're the reasonable ones and stuff like that, but like they're kind of this weird fringe group in humanity's history that's just there. It's like, oh, we're the weird ones. You're the ones who don't believe what everyone's believed forever. That doesn't mean you're wrong, but it does make you quite strange in the scope of things.
Yeah, I hear you. One thing I earlier, and just disproving God. The name of the video is Disproving God, right? So like when we're talking about, I think we can disprove certain things. And Caleb, again, you mentioned this too, there's things by definition that I think like we can make a good case for the simple fact is for the flying spaghetti monster, for example. Well, what do we know about reality, and does it comport to reality, right?
Mhm.
So does, we know that time, matter, and space came into existence all at once, the Big Bang. So how could it be a flying spaghetti monster be this God, right? I mean, because it's contingent upon, pasta and flour
Unless you do what Lewis Wolpert did in his debate with Craig, where he just describes he says
the supercomputer, right?
Yes, which is basically just what he's describing as God.
Yeah, exactly. But you can't do that with something like a flying spaghetti monster. And even Craig tried to bring that up in the Wolpert debate. He was like, well, what is it? A computer has properties, and properties are a product of this time and space,
right,
that exist in time and space.
That flying spaghetti monster is timeless, spaceless. Well, how is something that's spaceless flying, and how is it made of matter that's spaghetti? At what point is it even a flying spaghetti monster at that point? You just robbed it of all the attributes. So you have to be consistent.
Right on. All right. So yeah, we're about up at 45 minutes now, guys. And I've had fun. But I want to turn it over to the audience for a second. Do you mind taking questions, ChristDefender?
No, not at all. But I can't at the moment see the chat. Hold on.
You can't. Yeah. I'll put it up on the screen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about it too much.
All right. Yeah, that's cool.
All right. So Acid Rain asks, what about the puddle analogy? Have you heard of it? Any of you?
I'm not familiar with that.
Caleb?
That's more of I wish Travis were here, because that's more of an objection to the fine-tuning argument. Oh, hold on.
There you go.
Yeah. There you go. He said it for me.
Yep. If a puddle was sentient, would it say, wow, this hole I'm in was designed specifically to fit me in it?
Yeah, so that's basically saying that people will try to say that here, like as an example, well, look, the Earth is a certain distance from the sun. If it were any further, we couldn't be here, and all this stuff. And then typically the idea is, well, you're thinking backwards. You're thinking, wow, the goal is to have humans be around, and so here's what it is. When in reality, it's saying, no, the reason we are able to arrive on Earth is because of all these conditions. It's almost like, or if someone else said, wow, look at this ice in this freezer. Isn't it amazing how the ice like is able to be in this freezer and all this stuff? And you're like, well, no, the freezer actually was cold first and then the ice formed. It wasn't, or I think one of the, oh my gosh, it was one of the founding fathers, or I think Thomas, I want to say it was Thomas Paine, but I could be wrong, said that he said, oh, look how the nose is perfectly made for the glass. Isn't it cool that our noses happen to match the shape of glasses? Where he's like, no, it's the other way around. The nose came first and the glass is made around it. So that's the puddle analogy. And I think that it's a good point, depending on how you approach the argument, but there are other versions of the fine-tuning argument. Again, Travis Worth, who's actually debating it, I think either right now or soon to be on another channel, so go check that out. But I would rephrase it to say it's a prediction thing, to say that, okay, in a universe where there is no God, we wouldn't expect there to be any, of all the conceivable universes, we would expect there to be any possibilities where there weren't any humans at all, and the fact that we live in a universe where there would be moral agents because God himself is a moral agent, that's much more likely predicted on theism than it is naturalism, because naturalism, you could have a universe where there's no stars at all. You could have a universe where there's completely different laws of physics, and there's a lot more ways you can get no life and no moral agents than there's that you could get life. And so we'd expect a God to make moral agents in life. We wouldn't expect a God to make a universe without it. We would expect a natural universe to not, very unlikely to bring about that. So that's kind of a way I'd get around that, is to say that this universe is more consistent with what we'd expect from God.
Right on, man. Yeah, I tend to agree with that point. I would also add that with anything, you know, you can come up with a hypothesis, test your hypothesis, you know, and make a case. And if you make that case, and it's more likely that the fine tuning is a product of a mind, or and the universe has information in it, and that, to me, that gives me the ability and the option to say, okay, it's a mind. You know, there's got to be a mind behind it. It's got to be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. And to me, that's the case I would come away with. That's the answer I would take from it. Now, of course, that doesn't mean I can't be proven wrong, you know, because like you said, there's a good probabilities to this as well. So I would definitely leave the door open for that. But ChristDefender, you're scratching your chin there.
It's reasoning from cause, from effect to cause, which is what you do in science.
Right.
So I've never really understood so much why the fine-tuning argument seems to not get much credit from the opposing side, because we see all of these intricacies, and like DNA, for example, it's a message. It's an order. You don't get order from chaos, right?
Yeah, I would say that, and you don't get non-living matter to turn into living matter. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, how does that come about? You know, and yeah, Hemet can say he doesn't know, but like, again, let's try to examine it. Let's make a hypothesis, say, okay, what's the best explanation? And that's what we need to do. And I think theists do that. So I think we have gotten to the point where we can basically say that, you know, we don't use anecdotes and just testimony. And I think that's been the apologists' cry for the last, at least as long as I've been doing it. We have given reasons, you know. I mean, I remember when Craig debated Hitchens. I'm that old, so I was actually watching it live.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
I was 10 years old when that debate went on.
Oh,
so
my gosh.
yeah.
Caleb, you're making me feel older, man. I was already working and had a top secret clearance by then.
Oh, boy. You know, you brought up Hitchens. Hitchens actually thought the fine-tuning, that was actually the argument that gave him most pause. There's a video on YouTube towards the end of his life. I'm not saying he converted or anything, but he said that's the one that keeps him up at night, that makes him think of, like, wow, how close we would have been to having a universe full of nothing, basically. And so that's I have to find the video, but if you look it up, it's really interesting.
Travis is not debating yet. He obviously saw
Travis is watching.
Is awesome.
Yeah, I know. I hope so. Good luck on your debate, Travis.
Yeah, good luck, buddy. All right. How old is the Earth? I'm gonna let ChristDefender take this one. I ain't touching it right now.
What makes you think I wanna?
Because you're the special guest.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, ladies first, gentlemen.
Yeah, ladies first.
Hide
behind that one.
I haven't landed on a definite answer to this one. I've actually been asked this a few times on the Q&A on TikTok, and I'm still sort of looking into it.
Right.
So I couldn't give you an exact figure.
All right. We'll let you slide there. Caleb, what do you got?
About 4.5 billion is the closest I can get to an exact figure.
Yep, I would say about 4.6. You know,
4.58.
Yeah. We're gonna weigh how many jelly beans are in the jar, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say 4.6. I'm an old Earth creationist by far. I'm definitely a huge fan of Hugh Ross, who we've had on the show. So yes, we love Hugh and we love Reasons to Believe. And yeah, they're awesome. Uh, there's another question that came in from your buddy Daniel.
No.
What are the limits of natural theology? And since this is your friend Caleb, you shall answer this first. What
Gosh.
are the limits of natural theology?
Oh, I talk with Daniel a couple times a week, so that's always fun. That's a good question. I think that natural theology gets us to general concepts of God, but I would be hesitant to say that we can know everything about. I think if we could know everything about God just from natural theology, we wouldn't need revelation. We wouldn't need Scripture, and so I think Scripture tells us things that we wouldn't be able to intuitively know, like the Trinity, or how to treat each other morally, or certain spiritual truths and stuff like that. So I think that more things that apply to our every day-to-day lives are things that we wouldn't necessarily get from natural theology. But natural theology can tell us a lot about the character of God. So that's kind of where I would land.
All right. Yeah, I would. ChristDefender, I'll let you go next.
Can you define natural theology?
Natural theology is basically natural revelation, like what God reveals to us in nature. Would that be a good definition or a simple definition, Caleb, you think?
Yeah, I think more natural theology is just like philosophical elements of theology as well. But I mean, you're not wrong. Yeah, stuff that's not like specifically given in Scripture, but just looking through the world empirically and philosophically, getting ideas about God from that.
I mean, I don't think that would stand alone. I think we need Scripture. I think Scripture does reveal a lot about, and also it would affirm a lot about God. So yeah, that wouldn't stand alone. You need both, or you can have both.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the limit to natural theology is where special revelation would have to come into play. So like what we do examine in the natural world, I think gives glory to God, like in Romans and in the Psalms, the heavens declare his glory and the earth is his footstool. I mean, I think these are all areas which kind of give us that allness when we can look at the world and see this beautiful planet and dangerous planet even, and we can see that and we can just be like, wow. We can look out in the space and be like, wow, there has to be a God, and I think that revelation that we get, the natural theology that we gain by philosophy and science and discovery, really the limit is where we need that supernatural, for example, like Christ being incarnate, understanding the depths of sin and how far it can astray the human heart from God. So yeah, I think that's that's where that's its limits. It can't tell us about Jesus Christ and the Trinity and who he is and stuff like that, like Caleb was saying. But yeah. Next question, Acid Rain 100. Got another one. Matthew 27, it talks about many saints being raised from the dead with Jesus and going around preaching to people. I find this an odd verse, and it's never expanded on. What do you say about this? ChristDefender, this is your friend, so you get to... No, this is a fan.
My friend?
Yeah, your fan.
Is it?
No, they do like watching your videos. See, look.
Oh, okay.
I love to binge ChristDefender's TikTok vids. There you go.
Oh, you're skipping ahead to questions.
It is. There was a question in there. And that there is. I'm going to put it back up because there is a question in there. So you got a compliment, and we'll get to the Matthew question right now. Matthew 27.
Okay. It isn't expanded. It isn't expanded on in Scripture, and to be honest, I mean, I don't go beyond what Scripture. If Scripture is silent on a matter, I'm silent. I'm not going to try and speak for God. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, there are
I
a
mean,
couple of various versions of what people think about Matthew 27 on where the
Yeah.
saints are being raised from the dead and stuff like that. Caleb, what did you
Well,
think
like,
about this? Oh,
what would be the issue? You know, what's the problem to dealing with this? Let's say, yeah, they were raised with Jesus.
right.
And
So I think it's an odd place in the Bible where people like Norm Geisler, I don't know if you know who Norm Geisler was, and Mike Licona actually got into a heated battle over whether this is an actual event. Are we looking at apocalyptic literature? Or, what's odd is the verse placement and so forth. I mean, there's I think in one part of it sounds like this event happens before Jesus came back, but to me it always sounded like this happened at the resurrection. But it is kind of out of place because it describes the resurrection right after it gets more detailed into the resurrection account after this verse, but this happens. This verse kind of like jumps in where the veil is torn, right? Caleb, am I right on that?
Yep.
Okay, so it jumps in where the veil is torn. So that's the issue, and it's probably one you can read and think about too. You have something on it, Caleb?
Yeah. So I've talked about this a little bit with different people. I actually interviewed Mike Licona back on Dale's channel,
Yeah.
in January, and I don't know if this was on camera, but we talked a little bit about that. I think it was before the show like went live. And yeah, I think it was. I'm disappointed that Mike was fired for his view because he got accused of rejecting inerrancy, and he was just like, no, this may be just apocalyptic language. I don't know if I agree with that view, though. I know that David mentioned people have different views. Some people think that this is apocalyptic imagery. Some people think this is meant to be literal. I think the issue with the apocalyptic imagery is that it doesn't, from the textual point, it doesn't seem obvious that that's the point. And none of the church fathers, to my knowledge, thought this. When you read the earliest ones, none of them said, "Oh yeah, this is obviously allegorical." No, most of them took it to be pretty literal. And then the issue with the historical one, people say is, well, why didn't anybody else write this down? You think if people walking around Jerusalem, this would be all over the place. And that's mostly just an argument from silence. And although I agree that there are historical issues of, how did Matthew hear about this story? Did he see this himself? And all those issues. I don't know if the argument itself is sufficient. Also, there's debate as to whether or not, we might actually have references to this. There's a Christian writer named Quadratus in the very early 2nd century who talks about people Jesus healed and raised from the dead, and that some of them were still alive in his day. So that could be talking about those people. We don't know. You also have in 1 Peter and I think it's the Odes of Solomon. You have the references of Jesus going to Hades and freeing the saints, and then them rising. That might be a reference to what's going on here in Matthew. It's not very clear, but yeah, I was just going to reference one of my favorite books by a moderate scholar who's not really a fundamentalist Christian or an atheist, called The Resurrection of Jesus, Apologetics, Polemics, History. He actually has a whole chapter on it called, I don't know if you can see that, Resurrected Holy Ones. And he basically, he ends up disagreeing with Licona. He thinks that it was meant to be taken literally, but he also doesn't think that it actually happened. So he thinks this is just a legend that happened, but that Matthew thought it was meant to be taken literally. So I only said to say there's a lot of different views on it, and it is. I will agree that it's an odd verse, but I don't necessarily agree with the fact that we don't have more sources for it is troubling, because when you look at other cases of miracles, in fact, I'll do the second book by Keener on miracles. Keener has, I think, 50 different stories of people being risen from the dead, and most of these don't make news or anything. So it's like, yeah, you can have, and this is in the 21st century where people have cameras and newspapers, stuff like that. If you took this 2,000 years ago, most people couldn't write or read. It's not surprising at all to me that we only have one source for this, because many events that are equally as incredible only have one or two sources. So.
Yeah, but it wasn't written by other eyewitnesses either. So I think
Right.
that could provide a little weight to it. That was my big issue, is because you see Matthew does employ throughout his gospel, he does employ that apocalyptic imagery just as John does.
Right.
but I think there's a case to be made for the apocalyptic imagery, for the simple fact is the placement of that specific section of the verse. It's happening as the temples,
But you believe the temple really
Yeah.
did tear, right? You don't think that's just a metaphor?
I think it. I do. I think it is. And I think that the. I think, in other words, I think an earthquake could have caused the veil to tear. I think something could have happened. I also get. Who was it? Man, I can't remember his name, but he was writing a letter about the earthquake that happened in 33 AD, right? So Julicanus or Sextus Julicanus, something like that.
Oh, Julius Africanus.
Yeah, Africanus. So we do get stuff like that.
Well, there's actually
however, I do agree with you here, and this is where I'll come into conjunctions, because I haven't made like a full stance on it. And it comes to the aspect, like you're saying, the early church fathers obviously had, their ideas of it. And I think that as a historian, as somebody that studies history, one account is good enough. One account is, two accounts are like a gold mine. But if there is something that does report it, it's worth to be looked at. It needs to be looked at. It needs to be looked at deeper. It does need to be deciphered and stuff like that. So yeah,
it does. And again, it just depends, because I think, as we said, I'll just finish off by saying, like, although I don't think arguments from silence are good, it's not so much that Matthew reports it. It's I think that it's just harder historically, because we don't know where Matthew, he never says that he personally saw this. Did he hear this from someone? Did he talk to people who saw the same? We just don't know. So I'm not saying that disproves. I'm just saying it is hard to historically, because we just don't know where he got his sources from. And he's not claiming that, even if you think Matthew actually wrote the Gospel of Matthew, this isn't this, assuming that he wasn't even in Jerusalem at the time that we know of. So we just don't know. That's I think
right.
That.
Yeah. All right, ChristDefender. Last one is for you.
Go.
Oh, hold on.
Fan.
I would love to hear best apologetics books to read. Thanks.
You're gonna go first.
One of the first ones that I read was actually a Ravi Zacharias book. I think the title was 101 Questions or something like that. You know it? Is that right? 101 Questions.
Right. I haven't read it.
Yeah. It's
that was a really that was a really good book, because it's like you reference it whenever you need it. It's laid out very well, because you have all of these typical questions and some more, not so typical, and you just go to the appropriate page. It's a good one to start off with. I mean, other than that, my favorite book, which isn't necessarily an apologetics book, is actually Mere Christianity. I've read that more than once. I think he does a good job there, like a really good job.
Yeah,
I definitely recommend that.
Got a Lewis fan. There we go.
Yeah,
that was one of the first people I read too. So Lewis is definitely a one to look into. Yeah. I'll go next. I like Gary Habermas. I like the case for Jesus' resurrection. Let me see.
Habermas and Lacona.
Yeah, the case for the resurrection of Jesus for Lacona and Habermas. It teaches you about how to do history, which I think is pretty cool, and it's in simple form. I also like Mere Christianity and the Problem of Pain, which was was kind of like the one I chewed on philosophically at first. And yeah, that kind of led me to the other ones. What else? How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. It's not really an apologetic book, but it does give you a bit into how to understand Scripture. So, and it will set you on a path to understand how the Bible was created, which then you'll get into books like Jesus and the Eyewitnesses by Richard Balcom, which is one of my favorites. The Resurrection of the Son of God by N.T. Wright. And I've got them all too. But yeah, those would be some of the other ones. Like the Bible Answer Book, I thought was pretty good because it will give you a taste of by Hank Hanegraaff, and I know he's the Bible Answer Man. A lot of people don't listen to him that much anymore, but he actually gives good topics that most Christians will have questions on, and it will give you a launch pad to jump into the other one. And I think Defenders by William Lane Craig is a must read for any beginner apologist that is trying to understand that type of stuff. And of course, if you want to understand other religions, I did like Ravi's book on Jesus Talks to Buddha. That was pretty cool. But yeah, Caleb, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I was going to say mere Christianity as well. So I'm glad we all agree that that's one of the like OPs. I would say Craig's Reasonable Faith as well. I'll also join in and with Russell and say Resurrection of the Son of God by N.T. Wright. Although I like the ideas of the book more than the book itself because it's very long and the structure is very weird. So I have structures, but the concepts in the book are very good. And those are the ones that, and if you want a more if you want a popular level version, I would say, is there a no? Is there a God? Yeah, I think it's Is There a God by Richard Swinburne, and he has a more technical version called The Existence of God, and then probably some stuff by Josh Rasmussen. So if you like How Reason Can Lead to God or something like that. So those are ones.
I really like also the way John Lennox writes. So I would also suggest jumping into that as well. But again, that's all the time we got, guys. We're done, and I know ChristDefender is ready to go to bed, probably.
I am.
It's late.
It's late over there.
Yep. And we're sorry we held you a little bit over an hour there, hour and 10 minutes. But
no, that's fine. I enjoyed it.
Why don't you just give us one more plug before we get out of here?
Okay. So if you want to see more of my content, you can follow me on YouTube, TikTok, or Instagram. Same screen name all across, ChristDefender, one word. And yeah.
Awesome. Bye. I was waiting to say it the whole time. All right, guys, you have a good day. Again, this is PorA Raw, and we are out of here.
Bye.
Bye.